The following covers the actions of various Space Marine chapters prior to and during the 13th Black Crusade. This should be viewed as supplementary information to complement the larger histories in both the Fall of Cadia Voxcast and also the 13th Black Crusade Voxcast. Links below. With the forces of Abaddon the Despoiler flooding through the Cadian Gate, the Imperium's defences are hard-pressed to stem the tide of chaos threatening to overwhelm them. But amongst the defenders stand at least 20 Space Marine chapters, the very finest warriors in all the armies of mankind. Scriveners, Haynes and Hoare report from the front lines on a selection of the Space Marine chapters standing resolute before the invasion. Untold thousands of Imperial Guardsmen man the defences of the fortress worlds of the Cadian Gate. Though they stand before the teeming hordes of chaos with courage and honour, they are but men, and subject to the limitations of a man's flesh. There is, however, another force set before the Despoiler, though they number but one warrior for every battalion of Imperial Guard. The superhuman Space Marines of the Adeptus Astartes stand before the rank and file of humanity, ready to sacrifice all in the name of the immortal God Emperor of mankind. The Space Wolves. When the Governor Primus of Cadia sent out his plea for aid to the sectors surrounding the Cadian Gate, the Space Wolves were amongst the first to answer. Mobilizing his entire chapter, Logan Grimnar, the Space Wolves chapter master, recalled every one of his 12 great companies from whatever missions they were engaged upon, and set course for the Cadian Gate. Grimnar arrived at Cadia at the head of a grand fleet, consisting of the ships of 5 of the great companies, and wasted no time in calling for a council of war with the Governor Primus and the Lord Castellan of Cadia. The council determined that the skills of the Space Wolves would be best utilised by dispatching individual great companies to specific areas where they could respond as and when a threat appeared. Grimnar's own great company attached itself to the fleet of Admiral Khorne, and first saw action within weeks of their arrival at the Battle of Ormentep. It is reported that Grimnar's rune priests had forewarned him of the intervention of the legendary, long-lost Space Wolves 13th Great Company at the ground battle for the listening station that preceded the space battle. The Great Wolf himself would not be drawn to comment on the matter, and no trace of the 13th Company was discovered. When the full force of Abaddon's Black Crusade broke, Grimnar and his great company fought alongside Khorne as the fleet attempted to forestall the invasion of Cadia. The last confirmed contact with Grimnar reported that his great company was set to attempt planetfall on Cadia as the last of the orbital defences fell. Whether or not the action was successful is not yet clear, but it is known that the Old Wolf's fleet withdrew to Cantral alongside Admiral Khorne's ships without the warriors of the First Great Company. The Howling Griffins. 7 of the 8 companies dispatched by the Howling Griffins are currently engaged in a grueling trench war on Amistel Majoris. Having broken through the Plague Fleet blockading the world, the 2nd to 8th companies arrived in time to bolster the Drukian Fenguard, who were suffering horrific losses to the hell-spawned epidemics unleashed by the traitor forces facing them. Within days, the Howling Griffins and the Legio Astorum Titans were able to man the extensive defences constructed by the Drukians. Any warrior caught in the open and not protected by power armour when the plague winds hit could be sure of an excruciating death, and an eternity of servitude as a plague zombie in Nurgle's legions. The first company of the Howling Griffins, including Chapter Master Alvaro, are currently based on the battle barge Force of Destiny, and are engaged upon a mission to track down and persecute a company of Night Lords under the command of the infamous demon prince Persilator. It is widely known that the Howling Griffins harbour a particularly deep hatred of the demon prince. While that hatred serves the greater needs of the Imperium's defence against the forces of chaos, no other authority has sought to question Alvaro's actions. The Death Spectres. When an apparently small-scale cult uprising on Lelithar turned into bloody revolt, the Lelithar Planetary Defence Force found itself unable to challenge the leader of the rebellion, a shadowy individual referred to as the Voice by his followers. The Imperium's response to the uprising was swift and brutal. 3 companies of the Death Spectres chapter, alongside Imperial Guard of the Jeroen 146th Regiment and the Titans of Legio Ignatum, carried out the Golgotha landings, encircling and laying siege to the world's capital. Within weeks, concentric lines of trenches and gun positions circumvallated the city. Hundreds of square miles of minefields were laid, and the entire area riddled with razor wire. As the siege grinds on, the Death Spectres are adopting a fluid style of warfare, allowing their jump-pack-equipped assault squads to react quickly to any gains the Imperial Guard can force. In this manner, they have succeeded in infiltrating a number of breaches in the massive city walls, carrying out sabotage missions deep within the citadel before withdrawing under the cover of another assault. However, despite these successes, the siege of Golgotha shows no sign of immediate conclusion, and the Death Spectres are set to remain engaged on Lelithar indefinitely. The Subjugators. The Subjugators chapter dispatched 3 companies direct to Cadia within days of receiving word that the despoiler had returned, vowing that the remainder of the chapter's resources would be mustered as soon as was possible. The chapter arrived aboard 2 mighty battle barges just as the Chaos Fleet was commencing the invasion of Cadia. The Subjugators threw themselves straight into the conflict, during which the 3rd Company distinguished itself by triggering the reactor overload that destroyed one of the Ramillies-class star forts orbiting Cadia. At the very moment the forces of chaos gained control over it. Only a handful of the 3rd Company escaped the subsequent explosion, but their heroic sacrifice undoubtedly saved the lives of many thousands of Imperial defenders on the surface of Cadia, who would otherwise have found themselves facing the might of the fort's guns. Dark Angels and the Unforgiven. All the so-called Unforgiven chapters are known to be heavily active throughout every war zone around the Eye of Terror, though they are not fighting as part of any coordinated defense strategy, and do not acknowledge the authority of anyone other than Azrael, the Grand Master of the Dark Angels. The Dark Angels are based upon a massive spaceborne fortress monastery, built upon a continent-sized fragment of their destroyed homeworld of Caliban. This mighty vessel has been sighted on a number of occasions, in widely separated areas of space. The chapter is a secretive and shadowy force, and the nature of their base is the subject of myth and legend. Thus, the scattered reports of it have, in most instances, been dismissed as the ravings of overstretched and overtired ship's crews. The battles in which the Dark Angels and other Unforgiven chapters have taken a hand appear unconnected to Imperial strategos, and unconcerned with the needs of other Imperial forces. Others have pointed out that the Unforgiven are, as they have done many times in their history, pursuing a strategy of their own. The only pattern noted to date is that a large number of actions have been fought in the vicinity of the ruins of Caliban, though the nature of the enemy and the objective is as yet unclear. The Doom Eagles. Upon arriving at the Cadian Gate, the Doom Eagles chapter dispatched forces to a number of war zones, notably areas that had already suffered terribly at the hands of chaos. The largest of these detachments, under the command of Captain Luctus of the 3rd Company, is currently involved in operations within the Bellis Corona subsector, where the notoriously pious chapter are battling those who have fallen to the curse of unbelief. Only those without the strength of faith to resist are afflicted by the plague, and it has been noted that not a single Doom Eagle's battle brother has been touched by its blight. The Doom Eagles have proven effective in combating the plague zombies, infesting many worlds of the subsector, though, typically for this aloof chapter, they have refused all offers of support in consolidating their successes. Marines Exemplar. Led by their chapter master, Commander Maxim Absalon, the Marines Exemplar committed all but a single reserve company to the defence of the Cadian Gate early in the conflict, arriving less than a week after the Space Wolves chapter. Accepting Grimnar as the more experienced commander, Absalon allowed his companies to be deployed according to the Great Wolf's strategy, which saw them dispatched across all the war zones to bolster those defences most in danger of falling. Tragically, Absalon was lost in the opening phase of the conflict, as his company attempted to extract the senior staff of an astropathic way station before the forces of the Despoiler overwhelmed the jungle moon on which it was located. The 5th Columnus, a traitor Imperial Guard unit led by the demagogue Colonel Job, were making a push towards the Bellis Corona system, but had first to secure the jungle moon. Greatly outnumbered, Absalon led his force in a desperate breakout, and although the majority of the company escaped, the commander's Thunderhawk gunship was shot down, exploding as it failed to clear the jungle canopy. The commander is listed as missing in action, though the Marines Exemplar have not yet given up hope that he may have survived the crash and is active behind enemy lines. However, Absalon's second-in-command, Captain Raoul, has distanced the chapter from Logan Grimnar's Council of War, preferring instead to deploy the companies as his own advisors see fit. Harbingers. Although they have most recently been heard of purging Orks from the Pacinian Belt, the Harbinger chapter has an old score to settle with the Death Guard. The chapter's origins can be traced back to the raid on their Black Planet homeworld by the Death Guard, aided by Fabius Bile. Their chapter master, Nimrod Grudge, received early word of the plague of unbelief and mobilized the chapter accordingly, leaving most of the chapter either in the Pacina system or on the Black Planet. The Harbinger's 1st, 4th, 7th, and 9th Company boarded their battle barge Unrelenting Fury and set course for Nemesis Tessaria. Immediately upon their arrival, they were recruited for a special mission, as the Harbingers are known for their skill in the arts of boarding space hulks and launching planetary assaults. It can only be assumed that their mission involves the use of these particular skills. The Ultramarines. 10,000 years ago, in the aftermath of the Horus Heresy, Rabute Gilliman, the Primarch of the Ultramarines, decreed that his chapter would stand ready to oppose the traitors that fled to the Eye of Terror, should they ever return, to plague the Imperium. The Ultramarines took no part in the Battle of the Emperor's Palace, as they were fighting half a galaxy away, and Gilliman was determined that his chapter would never find itself unable to respond to such a threat again. The solution was to ensure a continuous presence in the vicinity of the Eye of Terror by maintaining an honour company made up of individual squads from different companies. In time, the chapter's commitments across the Imperium necessitated that the other primogenitor chapters, the second founding successors of the Ultramarines, should also provide squads. For the last 10,000 years, this guard has maintained a presence at the Cadian Gate, standing firm alongside the other chapters stationed there to challenge any Black Crusade that threatens Cadia's defences. At the outset of the 13th Black Crusade, the force is comprised almost entirely of Ultramarine squads, alongside which stand a number of detachments from the chapter's successors. The Honour Guard has already seen action in a number of engagements, notably the defence of Narcine and the Sarlax reprisals, lending the legendary courage and honour of the Ultramarines and their kin to the defence of the Cadian Gate. Reinforcements. The call to arms has been issued across the Segmentum Obscurus and beyond, and the warriors of the Adeptus Astartes have been at the forefront of those to answer. As Abaddon's blasphemous hordes smash into the defences of the Cadian Gate, battle barges belonging to at least a score of chapters are even now ploughing through the Imperium, making best speed for the war zones surrounding the Oculus Terribus. Amongst these chapters are known to be the Blood Angels, the Imperial Fists, the Salamanders, and the Black Templars, each of which are sworn by ancient oaths to defend humanity against those traitors who forswore their own vows 10 millennia ago. The beleaguered defenders of the Cadian Gate can only pray that these legendary warriors arrive in time to stem the tide of filth. Part 2. At the height of the titanic conflict that was Abaddon the Despoiler's 13th Black Crusade, humanity's very finest warriors answered the call to arms to defend the Cadian Gate. Halfway through the conflict, Scrivener Hoare filed this report, taking a closer look at some of the chapters taking part in the defence of Cadia. The Ultramarines Honour Company. The Ultramarines have maintained the Honour Company at the Cadian Gate for many millennia, rotating officers and squads from Ultramar, as well as warriors from the Ultramarines' many successor chapters to guard the Cadian Gate. The current commander of the Honour Guard is Captain Eshion of the Patriarchs of Aluxis chapter, a veteran leader of many centuries of service, fighting the servants of the ruinous powers. It is unusual, though not unheard of, for an officer not of the Ultramarines chapter to lead the company, though with the chapter's resources stretched by Tyranid incursions on the Eastern Rim, such a situation is said to become more common. The Honour Company distinguished itself early in the war, the first action being a bold, space-borne counter-assault against Abaddon's fleet as the Planet Killer closed on the agri-world of Lortox on the outskirts of the Agrippina sector. The action brought the world's planetary defence force time to evacuate a significant proportion of the population before the world was destroyed by the Despoiler's horrific weapon of planetary destruction. In the aftermath of the Lortox evacuations, the Honour Company redeployed to Cadia and the surrounding systems, launching a series of operations to hinder Abaddon's forces as they assaulted the fortress world. These attacks included a series of highly successful boarding actions against the lumbering space hulks being used to transport vast hordes of the lost and the damned to reinforce the Despoiler's siege of Cadia. In total, 3 hulks were disabled on the outskirts of the Cadian system, stranding an estimated 600,000 traitors, mutants and cultists to freeze in the cold depths of interstellar space. A 4th hulk, codified the Herald of Grief, was destroyed as an Honour Company boarding force succeeded in activating a seismic detonator deep within its core, causing the hulk to splinter into 100 fragments and killing every one of the estimated 200,000 enemy on board. The Iron Knights. The Iron Knights had been engaged upon a self-imposed penitent crusade for a number of decades when the Despoiler's 13th Black Crusade smashed into the defenders of the Cadian Gate, and they were amongst the first of the chapters in the region to respond. The chapter's first company soon became mired in the defence of Amistel Majoris, bolstering the flagging defences of the Howling Griffins chapter, as they fought a grueling trench war against the unremitting assaults of the Plague Marines of the Death Guard Traitor Legion. The war zone soon became a plague-ridden quagmire, the decomposing bodies of the plague god's victims forming putrid, sucking swamps through which the defenders were forced to wade in order to bring battle to their foes. A sickly patina of filth soon marred the Iron Knight's gleaming blue-grey armour, and the company's chaplains were forced to perform daily rites of purification in order to keep the virulent plague at bay. Recent sermons by these chaplains have linked the chapter's continuing presence in the war zone with their eventual redemption, vowing that the world will only fall at the cost of the entire chapter. By the 3rd week of the Black Crusade, Amistel Majoris was considered sufficiently secure that a portion of the Space Marine defenders could be spared to reinforce the Cadian system, which in the days following the destruction of St. Josamine's Hope was in desperate need of reinforcement. The Dark Angels. The Dark Angels and several of their successor chapters, collectively known as the Unforgiven, were one of the most active loyalist forces opposing the 13th Black Crusade, though they operated entirely outside of the Imperium's command structure. In the initial phase of the conflict, the Dark Angels and a number of their successors were able to deploy at strengths approaching chapter level, and where this was not immediately possible, absent companies were recalled with all haste. The Unforgiven were therefore able to deploy in large numbers, all operating under the supreme command of Chapter Master Azrael of the Dark Angels. The Unforgiven were involved in fighting in a number of sectors, most notably in the Caliban subsector, but also in limited numbers within the Agrippina sector. Their actions seemed at all times random, but centred on confronting the forces of chaos who were intent upon capturing the area around the ruins of the Caliban system. Abaddon's servants launched repeated attacks in this area, and it took Imperial strategists some time to discern that these assaults were aimed not at capturing a strategically important region, for the Caliban subsector contains little of any actual value, but was instead a calculated and deliberate attempt to tie up the Dark Angels and their kin in a pointless conflict, when their resources would undoubtedly have been better employed elsewhere. The battles that raged throughout the Caliban subsector were vicious in their intensity, with the famously stubborn and resolute chapters of the Unforgiven refusing to surrender a single yard, even though the ground they fought and died for was utterly worthless to all but honour. Intrinsically linked to the actions of the Dark Angels were the reports of a shadowy figure calling himself the Voice of the Emperor, and operating out of Lilithar. The Voice was acting as the figurehead for an extended network of anti-imperial cultists and insurgents, and his heretical teachings soon spread across half of the Agrippina sector, millions being turned to his cause. The Dark Angels launched a number of strikes against this figure, but on each occasion found that the pressures of constant attacks upon the hallowed ground of the Caliban system forced the hasty redeployment of their forces. Whenever the Dark Angels' forces did manage to close on the suspected location of the Voice, they always found it recently vacated, heretical graffiti taunting their efforts, the only evidence of his recent presence there. The Dark Angels seem to harbour an intense hatred for this individual, and their actions in this regard have still to be accounted for by Imperial observers. That the Voice's heretical teachings and proclamations frequently made mention of the Unforgiven and the origins of the Dark Angels' Legion is known, though quite why he singled them out above any of the other chapters operating in the region is not. The Voice transmitted a number of all-channel voxcasts throughout the war, each making reference to the events surrounding the Legion's earliest history, and making some quite astonishing claims about Lionel Johnson, the Legion's Primarch. The Unforgiven themselves have been vehement in their rebuttal of these blasphemous tracts, answering them with bolter and chainsword rather than mere words and facts. Some say the teachings of the Voice contain an element of truth, and that he is intent upon some course of action that will see the Dark Angels and the Unforgiven take their part in some yet-to-be-revealed plan. It is evident from the Unforgiven's relentless pursuit of this heretic and his followers that they have no intention of allowing this to happen. And where are those noble sons of the Lion in our hour of direst need? Are they to abandon us once more? To repeat their actions of 10 millennia past, when they failed to aid our Lord the Emperor in his final confrontation with the arch-traitor? Oh, woe! That the Unforgiven pursue their own gathering of angels at the ruins of Caliban, when the Emperor's servants are dying here upon the bloody ground of Cadia. Confessor Vidchev at the March of 1,000,000 Martyrs, Cadia. The Black Templars. Upon their arrival in the region, the Black Templars' first action was the relief of Thracian Primaris, which had held at bay heavy assaults by the forces of chaos for some weeks. The bulk of the force consisted of brethren, previously embarked upon the hunt for Gazskull Mag Urk Thraka. the Ork warlord who had unleashed such devastation upon the imperial world of Armageddon, and their participation in the action on Thracian Primaris left the pursuing crusade severely under strength. The Templars scattered the poorly led and deployed Chaos fleet in short order, breaking through the blockade to make an uncontested planetfall at the Departamento Munitorum logistical support complex at Hive Demeter. The Brethren were welcomed as liberators by the beleaguered populace, but chose not to remain at the Hive world for long, moving on to drive the forces of chaos back towards the Eye of Terror. With this early success against the forces of disorder, the Black Templars departed from Thracian Primaris, to the despair of its inhabitants. They had received reports of a build-up in Ork numbers in the region, a so-called Green Crusade, and determined to confront this threat at its source, lest it build into a potentially unstoppable war, capable of overwhelming the entire Scarus sector if given time to grow. The Blood Angels! 4 companies of the Blood Angels answered the call to defend Cadia, arriving toward the middle of the conflict. A significant force of Blood Angels immediately fell upon the Chaos Hordes assaulting Agrippina, seeking out the leader of the attacking forces, the notorious champion of Khorne, Khosalax, the Forsworn of the World Eaters. In the epic confrontation, likened to the mythic conflict between the Blood Angels Primarch Sanguinius and the mighty Bloodthirster at the closing of the Ultimate Gate. During the height of the Horus Heresy, the Blood Angels took the fight directly to the enemy. Khosalax, fully aware that his bodyguard was no match for the frenzied sons of Sanguinius, called upon the slavering demons of Khorne for aid. The summoning rite was an act of wanton, treacherous carnage, as the warlord ordered the World Eaters to sacrifice the lives of their cultist allies in order to gain the favour of the Blood God. Uncounted thousands were slaughtered in mere hours, their blood flowing in rivers through the corridors of Agrippina's primary hive, and cascading from ventilation grills as waterfalls of gore. The sacrifice had the desired result, and as the first of the Blood Angels' veteran assault squads screamed into battle, a blasphemous avatar of the Blood God ripped its way through the skein of reality to confront the sons of Sanguinius. The first Blood Angels to meet the greater demon were torn limb from limb, the beast devouring their sundered bodies as a taunt to their brothers. The remaining Space Marines were sent into paroxysms of rage at such desecration and threw themselves at the demon with no thought for their own safety. At the height of the battle, the sanguinary High Priest, Brother Numitor, confronted the demon and dealt it a blow that stunned it for a brief moment. Seizing the advantage, the brothers of the Death Company leapt upon its back, but the demon recovered and severed the High Priest's arm with a crack of its long whip. The priest was holding one of the sacred grail cups, bearing the blood of the chapter's Primarch, and the blessed liquid was spilled across the tarnished paving. At that moment, a deathly still overcame the scene. The Blood Angels momentarily shocked beyond action at the sight of their Primarch's blood seeping into the ground. Then, the silence was broken, as Numitor staggered to his feet and bellowed the words of the rite of exsanguination. The assembled brethren of the Death Company were overcome, with visions of the last time their Primarch's blood had been spilt by the servants of chaos, when Sanguinius had fallen at the hands of the ultimate traitor, War Master Horus. The Death Company went berserk. They hacked down the Bloodthirster in a savage, rage-fueled frenzy, oblivious to the fact that it dragged half their number down with it, before turning their hatred upon the warband of Khosalax, the Forsworn. The World Eaters were expelled from Agrippina at great cost by the Blood Angels, though the annals of the chapter's history will celebrate the casting out of the greater demon more. The warlord, Khosalax, was not found at the Hive, and the sanguinary High Priest Numitor has vowed to hunt him down, no matter the cost. The Imperial Fists. The Imperial Fists arrived at the Cadian Gate as part of the massive Adeptus Astartes reinforcement of the region, 5 companies smashing into the enemy at Cadia as soon as contact was made. After an initial space engagement that saw the chapter's battle barges and strike cruisers take a fearsome toll on the Chaos Fleet, 3 of the companies carried out a combat drop on Cadia itself, while the other 2 dispersed to bolster the defences in the surrounding sectors, including reinforcing the Iron Hands chapter at their homeworld of Medusa. The 1st, 2nd, and elements of the 3rd companies were instrumental in the defence of key points on Cadia, manning the walls of a number of fortresses with the steadfast resolution for which they are famed throughout the Imperium. In these actions, the 2nd company was noted for exceptional acts of gallantry, overcoming a horde of mutants from the notorious Stigmatus Covenant, numbering almost 10,000. At the height of the assault on the walls of Casa Vasan, the company commander, Captain Tialo, gave his life holding a breach in the fortifications, repelling a mob of mutants numbering several hundred before succumbing to the terrible wounds inflicted upon him. The captain's body refused to die, however, and is being held in stasis by the chapter's tech marines, who hope to inter it within the mighty form of a dreadnought, so that the renowned warrior may continue to battle the forces of darkness beyond the death of his mortal body. My company grieves sorely to see our lord Tialo fall defending the breach at Casa Vasan, but when we recovered his body and found that life lingered within him yet, we rejoiced, for we knew that whilst such men as he live, the darkness should be held at bay. Sergeant Gillen, 2nd Company, Adeptus Astartes Imperial Fists. The Relictors. The Relictors arrived at the Cadian Gate mere days before the first signs of Abaddon's imminent attack was seen. As in their involvement in the Third War for Armageddon, the Relictors refused to submit themselves to the authority of any other, incurring the wrath of Logan Grimnar on many occasions before he cursed the entire chapter and washed his hands of them. The chapter was reported as having taken part in a number of actions, and its presence is suspected on the periphery of a number of others. The chapter is known to have participated in an attack against a warband of the Word-Bearers Traitor Legion on the world of Subucio Diablo, during which an inquisitorial task force disappeared under suspicious circumstances. They were next seen in the Cadian sector, where they clashed with a Night Lord's force at Exemplar Minor, before becoming embroiled in a suppression action against Eldar raiders at Xerxia. The chapter then appeared at Cadia itself, but refused to respond to instructions from Logan Grimnar to reinforce the fortress world, instead making straight for the warp conduit and departing for the agri-world of Fremas. Exactly what occurred at Fremas is a matter of some doubt, but a pack of wolf scouts dispatched by Logan Grimnar to find out tracked the Relictors to the remote Diomedes archive, where the chapter appears to have repulsed a chaos attack before turning upon the archive's defenders. None of the defenders are reported to have survived the assault, but Grimnar's men recovered partial vidlogs that suggested the Relictors' objective was the sealed stasis vault at the heart of the mountain-top fastness. The contents of this vault are known to but a handful of the adepts in the Imperium, most of whom reside on Terra. They are not the type of men to allow such actions to go unpunished. The Iron Hands. Medusa, the homeworld of the Iron Hands chapter, lies close to the Eye of Terror, and was subject to constant attacks from the forces of the Despoiler from the earliest phase of the Black Crusade. Given that Medusa is the only world from which the Iron Hands recruit new brethren, they were forced to defend it above all other considerations. Though at least 2 Iron Hands clan companies are known to have fought elsewhere in the defence of the region, the greater part of the chapter confined its actions to their homeworld, where they fought to stem the tide of chaos filth. At the height of the defence of Medusa, the gargantuan tracked fortress monasteries of the 10 clan companies came together to face an armoured assault launched by traitors of the excommunicated Haradni 13th Heavy Armoured Regiment. The dark, polluted landscape of Medusa was host to one of the largest gatherings of armoured might since the Battle of Talan during the Horus Heresy, with over 10,000 traitor tanks arrayed against the Iron Hands. The ensuing battle reportedly raged for 5 days and nights, as armoured echelons consisting of thousands of tanks swept across the barren plains towards the mobile fortresses of the Iron Hands. When the fortress's guns opened fire, it is said 100 enemy battle tanks were destroyed. Each clan company commanding firepower equivalent to a mighty Centuro Ordinatus of the Adeptus Mechanicus. At the height of the battle, on the 5th day, the enemy managed to break through the Iron Hands' lines, a single traitor armoured company outflanking one of the massive mobile fortresses and unloading round after round of ordnance upon its more vulnerable rear from nigh on point-blank range. The Iron Hands launched a furious counterattack, assault squads armed with melter bombs deploying from the crenellated towers of the monastery to land atop the massed tanks. Many Iron Hands lost their lives in the counterattack, shot down by the tanks' pintle-mounted weapons as they swooped in, or ground beneath their tracks as they made near-suicidal charges against them in defence of the monastery. Despite the Iron Hands' losses, the counterattack succeeded, disabling or destroying the majority of the traitor armour and sending the remainder into a disorderly retreat. The Iron Hands then launched their own armoured assault on the traitors, massed formations of predator annihilators running down the enemy tanks and finishing them off with deadly accurate las cannon fire. With Medusa largely secured by the midpoint in the war, the Iron Hands could spare a number of clan companies to the defence of the Cadian system, and dispatched a force to oppose the vast hordes of invaders threatening to overwhelm the naval world of Vigilatum. The Subjugators. The Subjugators are at present in a state of disarray, losing the majority of the Third Company during the initial stages of the siege of Cadia, when they brought about the destruction of one of the Ramillies-class star forts to deny its use to the Chaos Invaders. The 1st and 5th Companies took heavy casualties during the siege itself, notably in the defence of Casa Galan, and the subsequent rearguard actions against the desperate Tarn retreat, and are in serious need of resupply. The Subjugators are a recently founded chapter, and as such maintain only a small amount of gene seed. The loss of 168 battle brothers who have fallen is a terrible blow to the chapter, particularly as the apothecaries were, in most cases, unable to recover the gene seed of the fallen. The chapter is now faced with a choice of whether to retire from the conflict and regroup, allowing time to rebuild their numbers, or to fight on regardless and risk the death of the chapter through sheer attrition, before it has even had the chance to make its mark upon the annals of the history of the Imperium. The White Scars. The first contingent of the White Scars to reach the Cadian Gate was the Brotherhood of Kajog Khan, a leader known for his victories at Armageddon and a dozen other campaigns. Kajog led his force against the hordes massing on Cadia, launching a series of devastating hit-and-run attacks across the world's bleak moors. Within a short period of time, Kajog's Brotherhood had become a major threat to Abaddon's plans, striking deep within enemy-held territory. So effective were their actions that the sieges of Casa, Myrak, Solak, and Rantik were lifted as Chaos forces were diverted to hunt down and confront the elusive White Scars. It would seem that Kajog's attacks were in fact too effective, for Abaddon himself ordered the Brotherhood hunted down and destroyed once and for all. He knew that the White Scars planned on him diverting forces piecemeal to oppose them, but he reasoned that a full-scale response would be beyond the scope of the small force to face. Ordering the 1st Company of the Black Legion, as well as uncounted hordes of mutants, traitors, and cultists, out onto the moors, the despoiler began his hunt. It was through the divinations of Abaddon's most senior advisor, the sorcerer Zaraphiston, that Kajog was located. Unaware that his force was being watched through Zaraphiston's scrying, Kajog launched a raid against an enemy slave train west of Lake Terror, only to discover that the convoy contained not Imperial prisoners, but the chosen of Abaddon. The first wave of White Scar bikers hit the convoy, to find themselves hurtling headlong into the guns of the Black Legion. The 4 biker squads realising they stood little chance against such a foe, continued their charge nonetheless, determined to buy time for the other warriors of the Brotherhood to regroup. The warriors of the first wave sold their lives dearly, and Kajog reluctantly ordered his men to withdraw, vowing that he would return at a time of his own choosing to avenge the deaths of his brothers. But Kajog did not get to choose the manner of his next confrontation with the enemy, for as his Brotherhood sped across the moors, they found every route cut off by the forces of chaos. At length, Kajog decided that to flee in the face of the enemy was an insult to the honour of his chapter, and resolved to make a last stand at the base of a pylon on the shores of the Kajukidi Sea. The pylon to their backs and the massed hordes of chaos to their fore, the warriors of Kajog's Brotherhood chose to defend themselves according to the ancient traditions of their homeland, by launching a suicidal charge against the enemy. The 60 White Scars smashed into a horde at least 50 times their number, Kajog Khan at their head, bellowing the battle cry of his chapter. As the Brotherhood smashed through the ranks of the horde, its warriors were torn from their saddles one by one, falling to the sheer weight of numbers arrayed against them. Kajog rode his bike through a sea of mutated bodies, clawed arms and whiplash tentacles seeking to drag him under with every metre he gained. Kajog Khan was the last of his Brotherhood to fall that day, and the storm seers of the White Scars claim that his shade remains upon the windswept moors, unwilling and unable to return to the chapter's homeworld until vengeance is visited upon the heads of those who slew him. The Space Wolves. Being the first chapter master to muster at Cadia, and being recognised as the most experienced Space Marine of those that followed him, Logan Grimnar was elected by his peers as the nominal head of all the Space Marine commanders defending the Cadian Gate. Some chapters, notably the Dark Angels and their successors, and the Relictors, refused to submit to his authority, pursuing their own agendas instead, and taking no part in his plans. When the Despoiler's hordes smashed into Cadia, initiating the largest siege of the world in its long and proud history, Grimnar was to be found leading the defence personally. The fleet of his great company fought alongside that of Admiral Khorne, inflicting heavy losses on the invaders as they closed on Cadia. Grimnar's flagship accounted for 3 enemy capital ships during the battle, including the infamous Desolator-class battleship Bleak Sabbath, as well as the entire Abolishers squadron of Idolater raiders. At the height of the battle, Grimnar and his warriors took to their Thunderhawks and drop pods, seizing the last opportunity to reinforce Cadia before the ring of Chaos invaders closed around it. Contact was lost with the Great Wolf for a number of weeks before his great company emerged blooded from the ruins of Casa Varak, where they had faced a force of traitors many times their own number, and defeated it through a sheer bloody-minded refusal to accept the possibility of defeat. Re-establishing contact with the other chapter masters fighting in the region, Grimnar dictated that all their efforts should be focused on the Cadian, Bellis, Corona and Agrippina sectors. Space Marines were redeployed, and contact was made with those chapters forging their way toward the Eye of Terror, so that when the reinforcements arrived, they would immediately launch a coordinated attack that would sweep away the invaders in one fell swoop. As the Space Marines of 30 or more chapters converged on Cadia, Bellis, Corona and Agrippina, the loyal defenders prepared for the ultimate reckoning with the forces of the great enemy. By the midpoint of the war, the Imperium was sorely pressed on the Cadian fronts, and it would take all the legendary skill at arms of the Space Wolves leader to see the defenders through this darkest of times. And with that, we end these reports from the front of the 13th Black Crusade. Emperor protects. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed that. As I said at the start, this is a complimentary thing that you should add into, if you, obviously, probably most likely, you've watched the Fall of Cadia videos and the 13th Black Crusade video.
the big ones. Slip this in there. A lot of the stuff got chopped and changed when, basically, like, they did the Eye of Terror campaign and then they just left everything for like 5, 6, 7 years, just in stasis. And then all of a sudden, you got Gilliman coming back and all that, you know what I mean? And they rewrote some things that had happened there, like blah, blah, blah. But a lot of this, you know, it's older lore, but it checks out. So just slip this in there and it'll add something to the whole experience of this big event. But that's it for now. I've got more stuff coming out soon. Thank you for watching the videos. Please like. Let me know in the comments what you think. Those things massively help the channel. And if you'd like to support the channel, there's links in the description how you can, or become a channel member, blah, blah, blah. Have a Merry Christmas. I'll be back again with more stuff soon. Probably before Christmas when you're watching this. I don't know. We'll see. I've got more stuff almost done. So, yeah, hope you enjoyed this one. Just a relatively quick one, but some good lore, and I really enjoyed this stuff when it all came out. Another bit of complimentary lore to the whole 13th Black Crusade thing is the Regiments of the Imperial Guard video I did a while back. That's a lot of the units there, some of the regiments I should say, were involved in this campaign as well. And there's that whole, I can't even remember what it's called now. Blood something? I don't know. There's a thing where, I can't remember what it's called. Khorne the Betrayer is fighting Blood Angels on a world nearby. This is just prior to the Black Crusade. I can't remember what it's called. And I'm not going to look it up because I'm busy. See you later, everybody. Have a great time. Bye-bye.